The morning sun cast long shadows across Naval Station Norfolk as Commander Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her weathered pickup truck. At 47 years old, she didn't look like what most people expected when they thought of a Navy commander. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. Her brown hair, streaked with gray, was pulled back in a simple bun. She wore no makeup. Her uniform was pressed and perfect, but her face showed the lines of someone who had seen too much and slept too little. Sarah had driven 3 hours from her hometown of Cedar Falls, Virginia, a small community of just 2,000 people nestled in the Blue Ridge Mountains. She had grown up there, the daughter of a coal miner and a schoolteacher. Nobody in Cedar Falls had ever expected much from her. They were wrong. Today, she was reporting to a new assignment. After 25 years in the Navy, she had been transferred to oversee a joint training program that brought together Navy and Marine Corps personnel. It was supposed to be a quiet posting before her retirement in 2 years. But nothing in Sarah's life had ever been quiet. She walked toward Building 7, the administrative center for the training program. The August heat was already pressing down, and she could feel sweat forming beneath her uniform collar. She carried a leather briefcase that had belonged to her father. It was old and worn, but she never went anywhere without it. As she approached the entrance, she noticed a group of Marines standing near the doors. They were young, fit, and loud. Their laughter carried across the parking lot. One of them, a staff sergeant with broad shoulders and a confident stance, was telling a story that had the others in stitches. Sarah recognized the type. She had served with hundreds of men just like him, good at their jobs, proud of their service, and sometimes too quick to judge others based on appearance. She walked past them without a word. "Excuse me, ma'am," one of the younger Marines called out. "Can we help you find something?" Sarah stopped and turned. "No, thank you, I know where I'm going." The staff sergeant stepped forward, his name tape read Cole. He looked her up and down, and something in his expression shifted. It wasn't respect. "This area is restricted to program personnel," he said. His voice was polite, but there was an edge to it. "Are you here to visit someone?" Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest. She had faced this moment 100 times before. The assumption, the doubt, the quiet insult dressed up as a helpful question. "I'm Commander Sarah Mitchell," she said calmly. "I'm the new program director." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Staff Sergeant Cole's eyes went to her collar, where the oak leaves of her rank were clearly visible. Then his gaze traveled to her chest, where her ribbon rack told a story that most people couldn't read. But he clearly wasn't reading it. "You're the new director," he said. The disbelief in his voice was barely hidden. "I thought they were sending someone from Special Operations Command." "They did," Sarah said. One of the younger Marines nudged Cole, but he didn't back down. Instead, he crossed his arms and looked at her with an expression that bordered on contempt. "With all due respect, ma'am, this program trains combat personnel. We need someone who understands what that means." Sarah felt the old anger rising inside her. She had spent 25 years proving herself, 25 years of being underestimated, overlooked, and doubted. She had medals that most officers would never earn. She had scars that told stories she never shared. But she had also learned that anger rarely solved anything. "I understand your concern, Staff Sergeant," she said quietly. "I look forward to earning your trust." She turned and walked into the building, leaving the Marines behind. Inside, the air conditioning was a relief. Sarah made her way to the second floor where her new office was located. The hallways were lined with photographs of past commanders, all of them men. She didn't let that bother her. She was used to being the first woman in the room. Her office was small but functional. A desk, 2 chairs, and a window that looked out over the training grounds. She set her briefcase down and stood at the window, watching as a group of sailors ran past in formation. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," Sarah said. A young lieutenant junior grade entered, carrying a stack of folders. Her name was Jessica Reyes, and she would be Sarah's administrative assistant. "Welcome, Commander," Reyes said. "I have the briefing materials you requested." "Thank you, Lieutenant. Please sit down." Reyes sat, but she looked nervous. She kept glancing at the door as if expecting someone else to enter. "Something on your mind?" Sarah asked. Reyes hesitated. "Ma'am, I should warn you, there's been some talk about your assignment." "What kind of talk?" Some of the Marines aren't happy. They were expecting someone else, someone with more visible combat experience. Sarah nodded slowly. She had heard this before, too. The assumption that because she was a woman, because she was small, because she didn't swagger and boast, she couldn't possibly have seen real combat. "Let them talk," Sarah said. "Actions speak louder than words." But even as she said it, she knew that the next few weeks would test her patience like never before. And she had no idea that the biggest test was still waiting for her. The first week at Naval Station Norfolk was exactly what Sarah had expected: professional on the surface, hostile underneath. Staff Sergeant Ryan Cole made sure of that. He didn't openly defy her orders. That would have been too easy, too obvious. Instead, he worked in smaller ways. He would arrive late to meetings, just late enough to be noticed. He would ask questions designed to expose gaps in her knowledge. He would make comments to his fellow Marines that were just quiet enough to be deniable. And worst of all, he had allies. The Joint Training Program brought together Navy and Marine Corps personnel, but the Marines clearly followed Cole's lead. He was charismatic, experienced, and had served 3 combat tours in Afghanistan. His service record was impressive, and he made sure everyone knew it. Sarah watched all of this unfold with quiet patience. She attended every meeting, reviewed every training report, and made decisions that were fair and thoughtful. She never raised her voice. She never lost her temper. But the whispers continued. "She's never been in real combat," she overheard one Marine say in the hallway. "Paper pusher," another muttered. "Diversity hire," Cole said one day, just loud enough for her to hear as she passed by. Sarah kept walking. She didn't respond. But inside, each word cut deeper than any knife. On the 10th day of her assignment, the confrontation finally came. It happened during a training exercise evaluation. Sarah had been observing a live-fire drill from the observation tower. The exercise was designed to test coordination between Navy and Marine Corps units in a simulated combat scenario. Cole was leading the Marine squad. The drill went badly. Communication broke down. The Navy team moved too slowly. The Marines pushed ahead without support. By the time the exercise ended, it was clear that the coordination problems were severe. Sarah called a debriefing meeting that afternoon. The conference room was full. Navy officers sat on one side, Marines on the other. The tension was thick enough to taste. Sarah stood at the front of the room, a laser pointer in her hand. Behind her, a screen showed footage from the exercise. "Let's review what happened," she said calmly. At 09:15, the Marine squad advanced without confirming that the Navy fire support team was in position. This created a gap in coverage that, in actual combat, would have resulted in casualties. Cole shifted in his seat. His jaw was tight. "The Navy team also made errors," Sarah continued. "They were slow to communicate their position and failed to adjust when the Marines advanced ahead of schedule. Both sides share responsibility for this failure." She paused, looking around the room. "This is exactly why this program exists. To identify these problems and fix them before lives are at stake. I expect everyone in this room to take this seriously." For a moment, the room was silent. Then Cole spoke. "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." Sarah nodded, granted. Cole stood up slowly. He was a big man, and standing made him even more imposing. He looked around the room, making sure everyone was watching. "With all due respect, Commander, you've been here for 10 days. You've never served in a ground combat unit. You've never led Marines in battle. And now you're telling us what we did wrong." The room went dead silent. Sarah felt every eye on her. She could see the younger officers watching, waiting to see how she would respond. This was the moment that would define everything that came after. "Staff Sergeant Cole," she said quietly, "I appreciate your candor." "I'm not finished, ma'am." The words hung in the air, open defiance in front of everyone. "This program needs leadership from someone who understands combat," Cole continued. "Someone who has been there, someone who has bled for this country, not someone who got her rank by checking boxes and sitting behind a desk." A few of the Marines nodded. The Navy officers looked uncomfortable. Sarah set down the laser pointer. She walked to the front of the room and stood directly in front of Cole, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. "Are you finished now?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." Sarah nodded slowly. Then she reached up and touched the ribbon rack on her chest. Her fingers rested on a small purple and white ribbon that most people in the room wouldn't recognize. "Staff Sergeant, do you know what this is?" Cole glanced at the ribbon. His expression didn't change. "Looks like a participation trophy to me." A few Marines laughed. Sarah didn't flinch. "This is the Purple Heart," she said quietly. "I received it in 2007 after taking shrapnel to my left side during an extraction mission in Iraq. The mission was classified, so you won't find it in any public record." The laughter stopped. "This one," she continued, pointing to another ribbon, "is the Bronze Star with Valor. I received it for actions during that same mission. We extracted 12 wounded Marines from a compound that was being overrun. I carried 2 of them myself." The room was completely silent now. "And this," she said, pointing to a small blue ribbon with white stars, "is the Medal of Honor. You probably don't recognize it because you've never seen one in person." Cole's face went pale. The Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. Fewer than 100 living Americans had ever received it. "I served 25 years in this Navy," Sarah said. "I have been shot, stabbed, and blown up. I have held dying men in my arms and written letters to their families. I have done things that I cannot speak about and seen things that I cannot forget." She stepped back. "So when you say that I don't understand combat, Staff Sergeant, you are mistaken. And when you say that I got my rank by checking boxes, you are insulting not just me, but every person who served beside me and every person who didn't come home." Cole stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. "This meeting is adjourned," Sarah said. "I expect better performance in tomorrow's exercise." She walked out of the room without looking back. That night, Sarah sat alone in her temporary quarters on base. The room was small and sparse. A single bed, a desk, a chair. The walls were bare except for a small photograph that she had brought from home. The photograph showed a young woman in desert camouflage, standing beside a helicopter. She was smiling, her arm around the shoulder of a young Marine. The Marine was barely 20 years old with a face full of hope and confidence. His name was Tommy Brennan. Sarah picked up the photograph and held it in her hands. The glass was scratched and the frame was dented, but she had carried it with her for 15 years. Tommy had been one of the 12 Marines she extracted from that compound in Iraq. He had been shot twice in the chest and was bleeding out when she found him. She had carried him 300 yards through enemy fire to the helicopter, ignoring the pain from the shrapnel in her own side. Tommy survived. He was discharged from the Marines and went home to his family in Ohio. For a few years, he wrote her letters thanking her for saving his life. Then the letters stopped. Sarah learned later that Tommy had died by suicide. The wounds from the war had been deeper than anyone knew. The physical scars healed, but the invisible ones never did. She had attended his funeral. His mother had hugged her and thanked her for giving her son those extra years. But Sarah had never stopped wondering if she had really saved him at all. That was the weight she carried. Not just the medal, but the memory, not just the honor, but the heartbreak. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said, setting down the photograph. Lieutenant Reyes entered, looking worried. "Ma'am, I thought you should know. Staff Sergeant Cole filed a formal complaint about today's meeting." Sarah nodded slowly. "What does it say?" "He claims you were unprofessional, and that you used your Medal of Honor to silence legitimate criticism of your leadership." Sarah almost laughed, almost. "Is that all?" "No, ma'am. He's requesting that you be removed from command and replaced with someone more qualified." Sarah sat back in her chair. She had expected pushback, but not this quickly. Cole was fighting dirty now. "Who receives the complaint?" she asked. "It goes up the chain of command. Ultimately, it will land on the desk of Admiral Hartley. He oversees all joint training programs in this region." Admiral James Hartley. Sarah knew the name. Everyone in the Navy knew the name. He was a legend, a 4-star admiral with 40 years of service. He had commanded ships, led task forces, and shaped military policy at the highest levels. He was also one of the few people in the military who knew the full truth about what had happened in Iraq in 2007. "Let the complaint go through," Sarah said. "I won't try to stop it." Reyes looked surprised. Ma'am, are you sure? This could seriously damage your career. Sarah picked up the photograph again. She looked at Tommy's face, young and hopeful, frozen forever in that moment before everything went wrong. My career isn't what matters, she said quietly. What matters is doing the right thing, and the right thing is letting the truth come out, whatever that means. Reyes nodded, though she clearly didn't understand. Is there anything else, ma'am? Yes, find out everything you can about Staff Sergeant Cole. His service record, his evaluations, everything. I want to understand who I'm dealing with. After Reyes left, Sarah sat alone with her thoughts. She looked at the photograph one more time, then placed it carefully in her briefcase. Tomorrow would be another battle, and she had been fighting battles for a very long time. The next morning, she learned something that changed everything. Reyes had done her research. Cole's service record was impressive, but there was something hidden beneath the surface, something that explained his hostility. In 2019, Cole's younger brother had been killed in Afghanistan. His name was Danny Cole. He had been a young Marine, just 22 years old. He had died during an ambush that went wrong. The mission had been led by a Navy officer, a woman. The details were classified, but the rumors weren't. Some people blamed the officer for Danny's death. They said she had made a bad call, that she had hesitated when she should have acted. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The Navy officer who had led that mission wasn't her, but Cole didn't know that. To him, every female Navy officer was a reminder of what he had lost. Every woman in command was a symbol of the system that had failed his brother. His hatred wasn't really about Sarah at all. It was about grief. It was about loss. It was about a wound that had never healed. For the first time, Sarah felt something other than anger toward Cole. She felt pity. But that didn't mean she would back down. The days that followed were the hardest of Sarah's career. Cole's formal complaint had worked its way up the chain of command, and now everyone on base knew about it. The whispers became louder. The glances became harder to ignore. Some people looked at her with sympathy, others with judgment. The joint training program continued, but the atmosphere was poisoned. The Marines followed Cole's lead, treating Sarah with cold professionalism that bordered on contempt. The Navy personnel were caught in the middle, unsure whose side to take. Sarah threw herself into her work. She arrived early and stayed late. She reviewed every training report, every evaluation, every piece of data. She made decisions that were fair and transparent. She never complained, never explained, never defended herself. But inside, she was exhausted. One evening, she was working late in her office when there was a knock at the door. She expected Reyes, but instead, a young Marine entered. He was barely 20 years old with a nervous expression. Ma'am, I'm sorry to bother you. My name is Private First Class Marcus Williams. What can I do for you, Private? Williams shifted from foot to foot. He looked like he wanted to run away. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for how you've been treated. Some of us don't agree with Staff Sergeant Cole. We've looked up your record. What you did in Iraq was incredible. Sarah felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It had been so long since anyone had offered her kindness. Thank you, Private. That means more than you know. Williams nodded. Ma'am, there's something else. I probably shouldn't tell you this, but Cole is planning something for the final training exercise next week. He wants to make you look bad in front of the brass. He's been telling the guys to slow play the coordination drills so the exercise fails. Sarah's blood ran cold. Sabotage. Cole was willing to sabotage a military training exercise just to make her look incompetent. Are you sure about this? She asked. Yes, ma'am. I heard him talking about it in the barracks. He said if the exercise fails badly enough, Admiral Hartley will have no choice but to remove you. Sarah sat back in her chair, processing the information. This was worse than she had imagined. Cole wasn't just hostile, he was dangerous. Thank you for telling me this, Private. I know it wasn't easy. Williams looked relieved. Ma'am, what are you going to do? Sarah thought for a long moment. She could report Cole. She could try to stop the sabotage before it happened. She could protect herself. But that wasn't who she was. I'm going to let the exercise proceed as planned, she said. Williams looked shocked. But ma'am, if it fails... I know, Sarah said quietly. But sometimes you have to let people show who they really are, and sometimes you have to trust that the truth will come out. The final exercise was scheduled for Friday. Admiral Hartley himself would be attending, along with a delegation of senior officers from the Pentagon. It was supposed to be a showcase of the Joint Training Program's success. Instead, it might be its funeral. The day of the exercise arrived with clear skies and a gentle breeze. Perfect conditions. Sarah stood in the observation tower, watching as Navy and Marine Corps personnel took their positions. Cole was down on the field, leading his Marine squad. He glanced up at the tower once, and Sarah could see the smirk on his face. He thought he had one. She turned away and focused on the exercise. It began well enough. The initial coordination was smooth. The Navy Fire Support Team communicated clearly, and the Marines advanced in perfect formation. Then slowly, things began to fall apart. The Marines slowed their advance. Communication became garbled. The Navy team, confused by the changing pace, made mistakes. Within 20 minutes, the exercise was in chaos. Sarah watched it all unfold. She said nothing, she did nothing. Down in the VIP viewing area, Admiral Hartley sat with his delegation. His face was unreadable, but Sarah could see him taking notes. The exercise ended in failure. The objectives were not achieved. The coordination was a disaster. Cole walked off the field with a satisfied expression. He had gotten exactly what he wanted. Or so he thought. Admiral Hartley stood up slowly. He was 70 years old, with silver hair and a face carved by decades of service. When he spoke, his voice carried across the entire training ground. Clear the field, everyone report to the main auditorium in 30 minutes, no exceptions. The Marines and sailors looked at each other nervously. This was not part of the plan. Sarah took a deep breath. The moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. The auditorium was packed. Every member of the Joint Training Program was present. Navy officers sat on one side, Marines on the other. The delegation from the Pentagon occupied the front row. At the center of the stage stood a single podium, empty and waiting. Sarah sat in the back row. She had considered not attending, but something told her she needed to be there. Cole sat near the front, surrounded by his fellow Marines. He looked confident, even triumphant. The exercise had failed, and everyone knew who would be blamed. The room fell silent as Admiral Hartley walked onto the stage. He moved slowly, deliberately, with the calm authority of someone who had commanded thousands and decided the fates of nations. He reached the podium and looked out at the assembled personnel. Today's exercise was a failure, he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. I want to understand why. No one spoke. I've been reviewing the data from the exercise, Hartley continued. Communication logs, position tracking, individual performance metrics, and I've noticed something interesting. He paused, letting the silence build. The Marine squad, led by Staff Sergeant Cole, deliberately slowed their advance at multiple points during the exercise. They ignored direct orders to coordinate with the Navy Fire Support Team. They created confusion where there should have been clarity. Cole's face went pale. In other words, Hartley said, the exercise didn't fail because of incompetent leadership. It failed because it was sabotaged. A murmur ran through the crowd. People turned to look at Cole, who was now staring at the floor. Staff Sergeant Cole, Hartley said, please stand. Cole stood slowly. His confidence was gone now, replaced by something that looked like fear. You filed a formal complaint against Commander Mitchell, Hartley said. You accused her of being unqualified for her position. You said she didn't understand combat. Sir, I'm not finished. Cole fell silent. Hartley reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather folder. He opened it and began to read. On March 17, 2007, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Mitchell led an extraction team into a hostile compound in Fallujah, Iraq. The compound was under heavy enemy fire. 12 Marines were trapped inside, wounded and unable to move. The room was completely silent now. Mitchell flew her helicopter into the compound despite direct orders to abort the mission. She landed under fire, loaded the wounded Marines, and flew them to safety. During the extraction, she was hit by shrapnel and sustained serious injuries. She continued flying the helicopter for 45 minutes before landing and seeking medical attention. Hartley looked up from the folder. One of those 12 Marines was my son. A gasp ran through the auditorium. Captain Thomas Hartley was 23 years old when Commander Mitchell saved his life. He went on to serve another 15 years in the Marine Corps before retiring with honor. He is now a high school teacher in Virginia, coaching football and teaching history to the next generation. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. She had never known that one of the Marines she saved was the Admiral's son. She had never connected the names. Commander Mitchell didn't just save 12 lives that day, Hartley continued. She gave those 12 men the chance to become fathers, husbands, and citizens. She gave them futures, and she did it knowing that she might die in the process. He turned to look directly at Cole. That is what sacrifice looks like, Staff Sergeant. That is what leadership looks like, and that is something you clearly do not understand. Cole's head dropped, his shoulders began to shake. You will be relieved of your duties immediately, Hartley said. You will face a formal investigation for sabotage and conduct unbecoming. Your military career is over. 2 military police officers appeared at the edges of the auditorium, moving toward Cole. But before they could reach him, something unexpected happened. Sarah stood up. Admiral Hartley, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. May I speak? Hartley looked at her. For a moment, surprise flickered across his face. Then he nodded. Go ahead, Commander. Sarah walked down the aisle toward the stage. Every eye in the room was on her. She climbed the steps and stood beside Hartley at the podium. Staff Sergeant Cole made mistakes, she said. Serious mistakes, but I don't believe he acted out of malice alone. She turned to face Cole directly. I know about your brother, Ryan. I know about Danny. And I know that you've been carrying that grief for years, looking for someone to blame. Cole looked up, his eyes red. The officer who led that mission in Afghanistan wasn't me, Sarah continued. But I understand why you see me as the enemy. I understand why you needed someone to hate. She stepped closer to him. Grief is a heavy burden. It makes us do things we wouldn't normally do. It turns good people into strangers to themselves. Cole's lip trembled. I'm not asking the Admiral to show you mercy because you deserve it. I'm asking because you need it. Because the weight you're carrying will destroy you if you don't find a way to let it go. She turned back to Hartley. I would like to request that Staff Sergeant Cole receive counseling instead of criminal prosecution. I believe he can still become the leader he was meant to be. The auditorium was stunned into silence. Hartley studied Sarah for a long moment, then slowly he nodded. Counseling will be arranged. The investigation will continue, but I will take your recommendation under advisement. Sarah nodded and walked off the stage. As she passed Cole, he reached out and grabbed her arm. His voice was barely a whisper. Why, after everything I did to you, why would you help me? Sarah looked at him with eyes that had seen too much pain to hold on to grudges. Because someone once gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one, and that's what saved me. She walked out of the auditorium and into the sunlight. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of voices, the sound of a community trying to make sense of what had just happened. But Sarah didn't look back. She had spent 25 years proving herself. She had earned her medals, her rank, and her scars. But the thing she was most proud of wasn't any of that. It was the ability to forgive. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all.